Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. This feels like back to school week, judging by the insane crowding on my train this morning. Anyway, so I'm Tom Keating. I'm director here at RUSI of our Centre for Finance and Security. I've met many of you before, but I look forward to meeting others of you afterwards when we'll have some drinks across the road. I keep saying across the road. You put this in my head, Penny. Across the corridor. So for those of you who don't know in detail about the way we operate, don't worry, I'm not going to give you all the details now, but the way we run our program here over the last 10 years has been a big focus on financial crime policy. What are countries doing? What are the bad guys doing, be they terrorists or organized crime groups? How good are we at intervening in all of that? But also increasingly, of course, the bad guys are not just organized crime groups and terrorist organizations, but they're also states. You hear people talk about state threats. Obviously, sanctions is an important part of what we do. And today's event, I hope, is going to be a kind of good combination. Geoff, I'm just teeing you up here. It's going to be a good combination of these two dimensions because Geoff's book, which I'm sure many of you have read already, Rinsed from Cartels to Crypto, How the Tech Industry Washes Money for the World's Deadliest Crooks, of course, includes some crooks who are states. And so I hope we're going to get into that conversation today at what is the first event of the second half of the year for us and the second half of our 10th anniversary. If you haven't been paying attention, it is our 10th anniversary this year. And we've got a lot of events coming along, including a conference early next year, which you'll hear more about from us at some point soon. Now, I do want to say at this point, Geoff, that this morning when I got up, I thought very, very carefully, because the last time you and I met to record a podcast, we had what can only be described as a wardrobe malfunction, because as you pointed out on LinkedIn, it was two blokes talking about something wearing zip-top jumpers. And so today I thought very carefully about what I was going to wear. It's a very good podcast. I recommend it to everybody if you haven't had a chance to listen to it. But I hope that we can get into some really sort of some of the meaty questions today that your book poses. If you don't subscribe to our podcast, please do. There's a new season starting on Friday. The other thing that I meant to do as well as welcome you is to point to the back. The smallest member of our team that Rob is standing in front of is our little donation box. If you feel like tapping on that on the way out, it's like tapping into the tube or the bus. It's what allows us to pay for the tea and coffee and the drinks that we're going to serve to you later on. I don't want to make it a competition, but the last time we had an event here, thanks to Catherine, somebody actually donated £500, which how they got that through their tapping limit, I've got no idea. But anyway, £500 turned up anonymously in our bank account, maybe some money laundering, I'm not sure. But anyway, we do appreciate the support that we get from everybody to help us run these events. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Geoff, who's going to say a few remarks before a conversation with Catherine, and then, of course, as ever, questions. The conversation is being recorded, so it's on the record. So if you want to ask pointed questions, do please bear that in mind. Anyway, Geoff, please, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Cheers, Tom. Good stuff. Hello to all of you. Thanks, Tom, for those opening remarks. And thanks to RUSI for having me along this afternoon. So for those who don't know, I'm Geoff White. I'm an author and an investigative journalist, and I wrote the book that Tom referred to called Rinsed, which is all about tech and money laundering. Slightly nervous about speaking this afternoon. Tom's exactly right. This is first day back at school. It feels like that. Nervous for a couple of reasons. Firstly, given the sort of august audiences that RUSI attracts, there's an unnerving sense that there's quite a few people in the audience who know more about this than I do. So I'll be interested to hear your questions and indeed comments at the end. And also because after the book was launched in June, it's quite an intense experience. Anyone who sort of looked at my social media around that time will have seen I was traveling all over the place and taking selfies of myself at every available opportunity. Then everything went quiet in July and August, and I had quite a welcome break and spent July and August doing DIY. So this very morning I was crawling around my kitchen on my hands and knees with a hammer in my hand, and then thought, oh crikey, now I have to talk about a book that I published a few months ago. So I'm rusty, is what I'm trying to say to you. I hope you'll forgive me if it's not as slick as it normally is. I got into the kind of financial crime, money laundering piece really in reverse order. So I covered North Korean computer hacking, as many of you will know. A series called The Lazarus Heist, which is a BBC World Service podcast, and a book of the same name, covers North Korea and the allegations against North Korea of cybercrime. Basically, North Korea going around the world, breaking into banks, other financial institutions, and stealing money to keep the regime afloat. And what was interesting about that is I come from a sort of cybersecurity journalism background. North Korea is this amazing opportunity. It's what I call a bog off, a buy one, get one free for a journalist, because on the one hand, you're covering nation state activity. So the hacking that North Korea is accused of doing is every bit as well equipped and well resourced as the hacking that most other countries now do. It's people working long hours under a sort of military structure to target their enemies and to extricate information from them. But simultaneously with North Korea, you also get coverage of organized crime, because what they're accused of stealing is cash. And at some stage, they have to wrangle cash and manage it in the same way that any other organized cybercrime network has to do. So you're sort of covering both sides. You can look at North Korea from a nation state aspect, or you can look at it from a kind of organized crime aspect. And either way, you sort of win. But of course, whether you look at it from one way in terms of the nation state stealing money to avoid sanctions, or just being a cybercrime gang stealing money and washing it, they still need the same services. They need laundering services to hide, move, and extricate that money. And that's the sort of key stages, if you like, in the laundering process, as I'm sure you'll know. And so what I found was time and time again, the North Koreans relied, once they've stolen the money, on external networks of money launderers. And this led them into some really interesting and some quite bizarre alliances. One of the things I've enjoyed about looking at the money laundering piece is the characters that you come across. As a journalist, I like to tell stories. I'm particularly story-focused as a long-term sort of narrative journalist. I like to have a character in the story, several characters ideally. And in money laundering, you seem to come across these bizarre, weird people. One of the people that North Korea ended up getting involved with is a character called Hush Puppy, was the name he went by. In real life, a guy born in Nigeria called Ramon Abbas, who simultaneously was an Instagram influencer with 2.3 million followers on Instagram, but by night was laundering money for the North Koreans. Now, Hush Puppy gets a lot of the attention because obviously he's got this social media following and he's quite an extravagant character. But actually, he was working in tandem with another chap who went by the name Big Boss, real name Galeb Alamari. He was living in Canada. They could not have been more different, these two characters. Abbas is born in Nigeria into a very poor background, works his way up, bootstraps his way up, and ends up in Dubai living the high life. Galeb was born literally in a chateau. His family owned a chateau in Montreal. Born with a silver spoon in his life, had a very privileged upbringing, but still ended up in the criminal underground. And these two men worked together to launder money for the North Koreans. The story of how they got done, by the way, again, the attention gets paid to Hush Puppy, this larger-than-life Nigerian influencer, but actually it was Galeb who brought the pair of them down. Galeb was incredibly secretive. There's only one photo that I've ever come across. Despite every effort I've made, I have one photo of Galeb, compared, of course, to Hush Puppy's hundreds of Instagram posts of himself. Galeb was incredibly secretive, but he made one slip-up at one stage in his laundering efforts for the North Koreans. He sent a single photograph to his accomplices of himself holding up a credit card that he wanted them to use for some scam or other. And of course, he didn't show his face on the credit card, but it didn't matter because the card showed a portion of his finger. And the Secret Service agents who were investigating him thought, I wonder if we can pull a fingerprint from that finger. And yes, they did, and that led them to Galeb Alamari, and the rest is history. An astonishing, astonishing case. So as I started looking into the North Korean sort of cybercrime beat, I started getting interested in all these money laundering tactics. Again, one of the amazing stories about North Korea, the attempted theft of $1 billion from the Central Bank of Bangladesh, so-called billion-dollar heist. They got away with 81 million, but that's a long story. One of the interesting things about that is that, yes, there's this huge hack, but actually what happens to the money is it ends up in the Philippines, where they withdraw it from a bank in cash, $81 million in cash, drive it to a series of casinos around Manila, and try and launder it over the casino tables. So at a certain point, the story of the hacking of Bangladesh Bank has nothing to do with hacking whatsoever. It's dudes in vans with Philippine pesos in casinos. And the story turns very, very real world indeed. So at any one point in that story of what became the Lazarus Heist podcast, it's not about cybercrime. It's not even about North Korea anymore. It's just about money laundering. So I got more and more interested in this piece about money laundering. I wanted to write a book about money laundering. Initially, I was going to write a book about the whole of money laundering. My publisher, Penguin, very wisely suggested we make it about technology and money laundering, which A, made the job a lot easier for me. It's a more contained subject. But also, because of the sort of cybersecurity background I had, meant we could kind of focus on those cutting-edge, high-tech bits of money laundering. And look, I will be completely honest, the amount of money laundering that goes on through cryptocurrency, for example, is way smaller than the amount of money that goes on through pounds, dollars, yen, and so on. because the cryptocurrency world is tiny compared to the traditional finance world. But if we don't pay attention to where those trends are moving now, as crypto gets bigger, as finance evolves, we miss the opportunity to work out what's going on now, and we end up in trouble later. So I'll make that as an excuse for kind of focusing on the new and the hip and the groovy, even though the old traditional finance laundering is still where the bulk of it goes on. What I realized as I was looking at these kind of high-tech laundering operations, cryptocurrency included, was that, of course, they're not just laundering money for cyber criminals. That's how really it started out. So if you steal money as a cyber criminal, the money that you've stolen is already inevitably digital. I'm hacking into your bank account, I'm stealing your money. I'm breaking into your company, I'm looking at your company's bank account. It's already digital. I don't need to take my drug cash in a suitcase to the bank. And so as a cyber criminal, you can go to a money laundering network and say, look, the money's already online, the money's already digital, you just have to help me with this bit now. You're not having to go that stage, the first stage of money laundering, the placement stage of putting it in a bank. And so traditionally, those high-tech laundering networks have worked with high-tech criminals. You steal money in a high-tech way, you work with a high-tech laundering group. But what I started to realize was most organized crime now has got some kind of technological component, and they've realized that they can move their money into digital ways quickly and then can use these high-tech money laundering networks to, again, move, hide, and extricate the money. So one of the stories I talk about in the book, in Rinsed, I wanted a story to start with where the reader could just start at the basic level and just get their toes wet and start low level. Very simple story of a Manchester drug gang, a pair of sisters called the Din sisters, Shazia and Abia Din. In their 40s, again, by day, a successful pair of businesswomen running a beauty business up in Manchester. By night, smuggling in heroin and selling it on the streets of northern England. Leaves them, of course, with a lot of cash because they're selling their product for cash. And so they need a network of couriers to move the cash around. This becomes difficult. The police keep catching the couriers. The cash is obviously vulnerable to getting stolen. So what do? They find a guy in London calling himself Chemdog, who will take their cash, change it into Bitcoin, and give them the Bitcoin. And suddenly the Din sisters have a fantastic scheme going because they can just take their cash down the motorway, Chemdog will take it, and then the Bitcoin they can send straight to Pakistan where their drug dealers are waiting to take it and then send them the drugs. This is a very basic story of how a street-level, very, very old-school drug dealing operation found Bitcoin. And the thing that was really interesting about this was because cryptocurrency is, as I'm sure you're aware, traceable, the crypto tracing companies were able to track the path of this money because they had the wallet addresses that the money was being put into by Chemdog because they intercepted Chemdog's communications. And what they worked out was that Chemdog was charging the gang 4% for laundering their money, which is an absolute steal. I mean, that is an absolute steal. 4%? I mean, usually up in the 10s, 20s, 30s. I've seen 60. And what that translates as is hundreds of thousands of pounds of extra profit for that gang. Suddenly they're richer than they were before. Their profit margin just goes up because they're not spending 20, 30% on money laundering anymore. So of course, drug dealing gangs, prostitution rings, child sexual abuse networks are all using these high-tech laundering networks. And what this feeds into as well is this sort of tech revolution that swept across finance, which again is something that will be very familiar to you. But tech has revolutionized finance, but in different ways at different areas of finance. So you've got traditional finance, you've got the mainstream banks and so on, who of course have introduced faster payment, online account creation, apps and so on. So tech has rolled across the traditional finance world. But it's also rolled across what I'd call, I was trying to think of a term for this, a sort of adjacent finance world, things like PayPal and Cash App and all these services that are integrating with traditional banking, but sort of on the kind of fringes of it. Again, that's all high-tech, technologically motivated. And then further out afield, you've got this whole new world of finance, peer-to-peer finance, you might call it, cryptocurrency, NFTs, video gaming, which may seem far removed from where you put your money and where your salary gets paid into, but are getting bigger and bigger and closer to everyday experience. More and more people you encounter, particularly younger people, will own cryptocurrency of some sort. And that world has been, a boon for money launderers. Talking of video gaming, just looking around I'm not sure about the demographic of how many gamers there are. We can have a show of hands. How many gamers have we got in the audience? Any people define a couple? That's usually how many we get. Yeah. I'm not a video gamer, but I find it fascinating how the video game economy has emerged as, again, one of these new worlds of finance. Not run by any traditional financial institution, not regulated as far as I can work out for the vast majority of it. And yet, handling huge amounts of money and a possible target for crime and also for money laundering. Again, one of the stories I talk about in the book, and this was I was looking for like a showstopper ending for the book. How do you You know, if you go and see a musical at the end, they get everybody back on stage and they all do a number at the end. That's what I was thinking of, like, what's the showstopper number I can do at the end of the book? And one of the stories, again, this goes back to North Korea, is the astonishing story of North Korea's hacking of a video game called Axie Infinity back in 2022. Were you an Axie Infinity player? Infinity? No. Okay. Good for you, because the game got hacked badly by the North Koreans in 2022. They stole an astonishing amount of money. They stole $625 million worth of in-game currency, which is a strong contender for the largest crime of all time, which is quite a bold statement to make. But if you look in terms of the largest amount of money stolen from one victim in one go at one time, 625 million is a serious contender. And even if you don't believe me, even if you think, well, I'm sure if I Googled it, I'd find bigger crimes. Okay, maybe you will. It's certainly the fastest, because stealing the $625 million took them 1 minute and 55 seconds. It's crypto. You type a few lines, it's gone. And then there's this amazing part two to the story. Like, what do you do? Okay, it's great. You've stolen $500 million of crypto. Fantastic. Where do you take it? Binance? Well, you can't. What do you do with $500 million of hot crypto? They took it to a crypto mixing service called Tornado Cash. Piece of software, and like the name suggests, they take in crypto from different people, mix it around, and then spit it back out to a fresh wallet address, which I'm sure for those of you in the audience, they're thinking, well, this is just money laundering. Yes and no. There are some legitimate privacy-preserving reasons why you might want to use a service like Tornado Cash. For the North Koreans, it's alleged they took their $625 million and they put most of it through Tornado Cash, and it's gone. The money is gone. And the brilliant thing, the great thing about North Korea for this is you're off the leash then. The clock is ticking while you're trying to launder your money. Because, of course, crypto is traceable. The Americans could see, everybody could see this stolen Axie Infinity money. They could see exactly where it was. And then it goes into Tornado Cash and poof, it's gone. What that gives the criminals is time. Time. Okay, now they can't detect me. Now they've lost the trail to the money. Now I can just take my time and I can eke this money out a little bit at a time. It buys you time, laundering like that. The people who run Tornado Cash, by the way, you think this is some underground dodgy service on the dark web. No, the three guys who set up Tornado Cash and ran it initially are named individuals. They launched it, they publicized it, they did interviews with the press. And you would have thought that they would be horrified by what had happened as $500 million washed through their service. Apparently not. The three people who ran it are defending their creation of the service, and many in the crypto community are backing them and saying, hey, you may not like the fact that North Korea has laundered $500 million through this service, but what this service gives us is privacy. And for us, in crypto land, we value privacy more than we value anti-money laundering. That's the decision that's being made. This decision is being played out through the courts. One of the founders of Tornado Cash, a guy called Roman Storm, is in the US. He's currently on trial, and I think is coming up for trial in November. It's going to be a fantastic case to watch. Get the popcorn. One of the other founders of Tornado Cash has already been convicted in the Netherlands, 5 years in prison for Alexei Pertsev. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Americans work from there. But this is where we're sort of ending up. You know, the kind of payoff to all of this is, yes, as I pointed out, the kind of technological cryptocurrency sort of side of money laundering is dwarfed by the size of the traditional finance side of money laundering. But we're starting to see cases where you're getting huge amounts of money being laundered through services in tiny fractions of time. And I think that's something to really sort of pay attention to. Hope that's been okay. Introductory remarks. Very happy to talk to Catherine now, get some questions from her, and also your questions as well. Thank you. Cheers. Preference for? Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff. That was fascinating. And as somebody who has read the book and is a big fan of the book, it was wonderful to hear you bring it to life. For those that don't know me, I'm Catherine Westmore. I'm a senior research fellow in the team here, and I lead our financial crime policy work. So much of what Geoff has written about and talked about today is the absolute stuff I thrive on. Nothing pleases me more than an interesting money laundering case. I wanted to start by asking you, as an expert now in money laundering typologies, if you had £1 million, how would you launder it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I was privy to that opening question. I was thinking, how would I do it? So it's $1 million in cash, I'm presuming.
You can choose.
Well, okay. Let's start relatively easy with cash. So you've got $1 million weighs a lot. It takes up a lot of space. I'm concerned that someone might come in and steal it. So my key challenge is to get that somewhere safe. And the other problem with having cash is it's subject to inflation. So, you know, it's going to take me a while to get my $1 million disposed of. And obviously, if inflation sort of hits 10% again, I've suddenly got not as much money again. So I live around sort of North London. There's a lot of little local businesses, and a lot of them are sort of cash heavy. My local hairdresser still takes cash. He put up his prices controversially by £1 recently. It's almost anarchy. I'm pretty sure if I went to George and said, "Do you know what? Every week, could I give you some money sort of put through the till? And you can take a cut, but then you put it in the bank and you hand it back to me." I'm pretty sure George would go for that. George isn't his real name, by the way. This guy's the name. And I think if I could get enough businesses together, but this is the thing, it would take me a hell of a long time to get through 1 million, wouldn't it? It'd take me a hell of a long time. Whereas, if I could do what the Manchester drug gang did and find someone like ChemDog and say, "Look, here's £1 million. You can change it into cryptocurrency. He gives me the wallet address. Away we go." So I think ChemDog is the way I'd go. I think I probably could get his number from some of the contacts.
And if you had 100 million, would that change the method that you went for?
Yeah.
Probably not in cash, I'm guessing.
No, the 100 million obviously is a completely vastly unfeasible amount. I mean, the 81 million that the North Koreans were accused of stealing from Bangladesh Bank was cashed out in the Philippines, and we worked out it's the weight of 2 grand pianos, that cash. There were 2 vans. It took them a day to fill 2 vans with the cash. So obviously then you get into the stage where you can't even put it in a suitcase anymore. What's interesting about the 100 million is I can then pay someone to do it. So for $1 million, first time I might be losing up to 60%, something like that. So that leaves me with 400,000, which doesn't sound great. But for $1 million, if I paid somebody 100 million, if I paid somebody even a few million, I still get a lot back. So what I would do then is obviously outsource that to people on the dark web. So you suddenly, at 100 million level, you're entering this kind of organized, sort of systematized laundering thing. Not that I would do any of this, it's all illegal, by the way.
All hypothetical. And what I think is also really interesting is, particularly with the smaller amounts, actually, you can lose a lot along the supply chain to just paying your bills or prostitutes, gambling, whatever. And actually, the amount you need to launder sometimes is quite a small proportion of the revenue that you've generated from your illegal activities. It's sometimes, I think, overlooked when we like to talk about the big numbers. And you talked about particularly the North Korean examples, but there are many other examples in your book of quite complex money laundering typologies, methods. And do you think, thinking about, I guess, your common criminal, not maybe your drug dealer on the street, but your drug dealer in the hierarchy somewhere, selling drugs in Liverpool, Merseyside, Scotland, do you think they are tempted by these techniques? Do you think we'll see some of these techniques moving into your kind of ordinary criminal? I mean, the Din sisters is a good example, probably, but I guess how common is that from an ordinary criminal perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, and I've deliberately picked on the Din sisters case, as being a great example. As soon as I came across it, I thought that's a really perfect example of 2 people that A, you wouldn't expect to be dealing drugs, and B, you wouldn't be expecting to be in crypto. By the way, I think with the Din sisters, my suspicion is the son got involved later on, and I suspect it was when the son got involved that they went into cryptocurrency, because the son's a bit younger. It always looked a bit suspicious to me that these 2 40-year-old women would be into cryptocurrency. So I think the son came along and said, "Hey, I've got this guy who can work it out." What's interesting is I know that there's sort of law enforcement activity around this kind of area, and what they're sort of discovering is, global networks of criminals who are taking, and the idea of, you've got high-tech crime and cybercrime and laundering over here, and you've got sort of low-tech drug dealing and people trafficking over here. They are starting to cross over because, you can, if you're, stealing money as a cyber criminal and you want to get it out in cash, well, guess who has cash? Drug dealers have cash. What do drug dealers want to do with their cash? Change it into crypto so they can send it to their suppliers. You've got this natural sort of crossover point, this kind of, area where the 2 paths cross. So I don't have hard figures on how many traditional crooks are moving from traditional finance and cash to high tech, but it's going to be the trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that point around this sort of almost Hawala-esque transfer of value that there is across different types of assets, cash, crypto, others, I think is really interesting, but maybe shows that old techniques die hard, really. Oh, I think I wanted to talk about one of the stories in your book, but one that's quite current as well, which is you've written about the Black Axe Group in Nigeria, launched in Nigeria, who have, I guess, laundered billions and billions of pounds over the years. wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the group, how it was founded and how it operates.
Yeah, an endlessly fascinating group. And in the book, I covered black acts from a kind of financial crime, fraud, money laundering point of view. But they're way, way, way bigger than that. And so that's something I've started looking at a lot more since I wrote the book. Black acts, again, fascinating origin story. Starts out in the 1970s in Nigeria as a sort of black empowerment movement. The Black Axe sounds like a sort of aptly terrifying name, doesn't it, for a crime group? But actually, the reason it was called the Black Axe, that the axe was the axe that would break the chains of colonial oppression and set black people free. That's how this movement started. Same sort of time as the anti-apartheid movement around South Africa. So you get this really interesting story. Then Nigeria's economy takes a slide in the 1980s. Black Axe starts to become a criminal enterprise, starts to get infiltrated by criminal elements, starts to become part of a very febrile political, quite violent political upheaval in the country, sort of through the 80s into the 90s. Then in the 90s, you get the emergence of email and, of course, the famous Nigerian prince email scammers. Just to make clear as well at this point, the vast, vast, vast majority, I mean, Nigeria is a huge country, and the vast majority of people who live there have nothing to do with any of this. This isn't about Nigeria against the world. This is the Black Axe movement against a lot of people, including Nigerians in Nigeria themselves. Because what happens is the Black Axe starts to merge with the Nigerian email scammers, the Nigerian prince email scammers. If you're going to send a scam email to somebody in, let's say, France, and say, hey, I'm a Nigerian prince, I've got €1 million, €1 million francs, as it would have been in those days, can you help me? If you then say, well, can you move the money into this Nigerian account? That's going to seem a bit fishy to somebody in France. But if you say, hey, can you use this French account, your victim is possibly more likely to move the money. So what these scammers, email scammers needed was a money laundering network, a network of payment locally. Well, guess who provided that? The Black Axe provided that. Again, during the 80s and 90s, there was this brain drain in Nigeria. Folks moved away, and some of them were the Black Axe folks who move abroad, set up Black Axe bases, or zones as they call them, around the world, and created this kind of money laundering network. And so suddenly, as a scammer, you can send your email to your victim wherever they are in the world. There's a local Black Axe guy you can phone up, and you can say, hey, can you handle this for me? Yep, great. That Black Axe guy will know somebody else in Singapore, Hong Kong, Morocco, and then back to Nigeria, and suddenly you've moved it through 5 jurisdictions. An amazing network of people. And what Black Axe has morphed into is this, what I call a kind of polymorphic criminal enterprise. Wherever Black Axe sort of pops up, it seems to take on a different crime type. So, I talked about sort of fraud there, email fraud, business email compromise. A business receives an email that looks like it comes from their solicitor, but actually it's a fraudster. Romance fraud, cryptocurrency scamming, but also people trafficking through West Africa, prostitution in southern Italy, forced labor, currency counterfeiting in Argentina, drug dealing in Sweden. These guys are an absolute phenomenon, all tied together by these kind of cultural roots that they've got, and all of it relying, of course, on some way to launder the money. All the crimes I've named above, they all take money, and that's all washed through these networks. So I find the Black Axe absolutely fascinating and would love to do more on it. I think it's an under-acknowledged group. I mean, I've talked about the North Korean hackers, the so-called Lazarus group. Google Lazarus group, there's thousands of articles, some of them written by me. By the time you get through them all, there's more. Black Axe, there's 350 pieces online about Black Axe, and I've read every one of them. I've never been in a position as a journalist where I've read literally everything there is to read on the internet about the thing. Why? I mean, they're way more dangerous than North Koreans. So I really hope either me or somebody else gets to cover Black Axe properly, because they are such an interesting and quite terrifying group.
Absolutely. I think there was a BBC article a couple of weeks ago around some of the law enforcement action taken about that. And I think Interpol a couple of years ago said that Black Axe and similar groups were responsible for the majority of cyber-enabled fraud. And as you said, many other types of crime as well. And I think that international aspect is really interesting. You see a number of countries, Canada, the US, UK, Ireland, where they have this international network that's very well coordinated, that does what they, gets the money into the system, gets the money out the system, perpetrates the fraud. And it's really an incredible feat almost as to how they manage this process. And I was wondering, I guess, thinking about the technology aspect of it, and the fact that, as you say, Black Axe have been engaging in criminal pursuits for a number of years now. How do you think technology has changed the way that they are operating, or has it?
Yeah, it has. I mean, most of the Black Axe's sort of fraud activity relies on what all fraud relies on, which is tricking someone into doing something they shouldn't do, sending some money. You don't need technology to do that. And actually, the very early stages of those Nigerian prince emails were letters that were sent out by folks in Nigeria to companies around the world saying, we work for this Nigerian oil company, we've got a surplus of money, can you help us handle it in exchange for your cut? So it starts with letters, it started with a letter campaign. And when email came along, they just went, oh, look, email is it's free, you don't even need a stamp, so that the taxes just morphed. My worry is, I, like a lot of people, when that phase of email scamming was happening, thought, well, who falls for this? They're badly worded emails, But enough people fell for them that it laid the seed capital for what came next, which was targeting bigger businesses per se, but also larger businesses with the same scam. I mean, I can scam you and get a few £100s out of your bank account, or I can scam your company and they've got hundreds of thousands. So it's applying the same sort of scam techniques. And we sort of missed the opportunity to tackle that early threat. Out of that grew what's called the next level scammers, which were the guys targeting businesses. And of course, for that, you need to be targeting the right business at the right time. You need to know who their suppliers are. You need to send an email that apparently comes from one of their suppliers, their washroom or hygiene supplies, or their cleaning firm or whatever. So you need a certain level of sort of technical savvy for that. And also, once the money hits, once the victim has sent the scammed money, you need to be on the ball immediately to get that money out of that account into another account, another account, another account, possibly into crypto. And then you need to also pay off the contributors along the way. So all technology helps in all of those sort of stages, I think. So the other thing quickly to mention is at a certain stage, what's helpful is to withdraw the money in cash, or at least put it through people's accounts. Recruitment of money mules, of course, has become hugely technologically reliant. Snapchat and Instagram, if you go and you look for the right hashtags and terminology, you will find multiple accounts where you can earn quick money for washing people's money through your account. So again, technology's helped with the mule recruitment and management side as well.
And I think there's a story in your book where you ring up somebody that you find on Instagram.
Oh, he rang me, yeah.
Oh, he rang you
to
try and set up a money mule account.
Yeah, so I was looking around and I sort of, set up a fake account, had a look around, followed a few hashtags. And the brilliant thing about social media is as soon as you express an interest in anything, whether it's boats or gymnastics or money laundering, it's like, oh, yeah, here's some other money laundering accounts you might like to. So you very quickly find yourself, I've done this in multiple investigations, it's almost too easy. You get used to, I want to investigate this, and you set up a fake account following a thing, and Instagram, Snapchat will just suggest stuff to you. So yeah, all these money launderers sort of emerged out of the woodwork, and a guy who went by the name Money Plugs called me up with a thick Birmingham accent and sort of talked me through the process of how I would give him my bank account details, and he would move the money through, and then I'd be left with a small amount of money. So it really is, it's as quick as a couple of hours and then one phone call and you're in. What I really wanted to do, but didn't get the opportunity to do, would still quite like to do, was to work with one of the banks, create an account, a genuine account within the bank with the bank's oversight, go back to this money laundering individual and say, hey, I've got an account, here's my account, please forward the money through. And of course, the bank's expecting it. And as soon as the money hits, they lock the account and freeze it. Obviously, the next phone call to the money launderer is going to be a difficult one when you reveal that I'm a journalist, I'm investigating this. But I did think it'd be interesting because the bank could then see where was he trying to send it? Where was the onward destination? The hazard with this is obviously you've just annoyed somebody who's probably connected to a bunch of drug dealers and they've lost 40 or 50 grand. You're not going to be popular. So safety-wise, there is a bit of an issue around that, but I still think it's a great stunt to do.
Yes, a colleague was talking about a paper that they've written and whether it would potentially annoy some organised crime gangs. And I said, if there's a horse's head when you wake up in the morning, you're in trouble, but otherwise I'm sure it'll be fine. But it's a good point, actually. Yeah, I think that point around what happens next after the fraud happened, that kind of onward chain, I think is not as well understood as sort of how the money gets into the system sometimes. So ripe for a research project, I feel.
And also, there must be the criminals must do their research of sending small payments to different institutions in different jurisdictions and working out who will take what money. Because what you don't want to do is have the 10 grand or whatever land in your mule's account. You try and send it to this bank in Germany, and it turns out they flag something that's above that amount. Yeah.
And one thing, just going off a slight tangent, I wondered kind of what you thought about the issues, let's say, that Telegram are having recently. Obviously, you talk about Snapchat and Instagram, but there are other messaging services. We saw across Europe the takedown of EncroChat a few years ago, which really gave a window into the way that criminals use kind of encrypted technology. So I was just interested to get your thoughts on either Telegram or what happens next.
Yeah, Telegram's an interesting one. I think people misunderstand Telegram and how in a way brilliant Telegram is. It's not like WhatsApp. It's not just like another WhatsApp. Telegram combines publishing with messaging. So it's almost like being able to have a website and also a messaging platform along the side of it. So you can have these huge Telegram groups and you can publish to your Telegram pages and then people can message you. You can do a bit of that with things like WhatsApp and Signal, but Telegram's really remarkable for that. So what happened, after I did some investigation into the dark web, did a lot of work around the dark web, and that traffic moved to Telegram, because on Telegram you could create effectively your dark website selling drugs or guns or whatever, but also it had end-to-end encrypted chat that people could contact you on. So, and everybody's got a mobile phone in their pocket, they can download Telegram and away you go. Whereas having to install Tor and learn Tor browser, which is how you access the dark web, is a more difficult challenge. So I found Telegram fascinating. Did an investigation into it for the BBC called Swipe Right for Crime, where we went to Telegram and we found, guess what, credit cards for sale and all that kind of. So it's been obvious that there's been bad content on Telegram for many, many years. Telegram's defense, I would imagine, would be the same defense that Meta and Google and X would all use, which is the so-called Section 230 defense. The Communications Decency Act in the US, Section 230 says, in essence, I'm paraphrasing, but you're not liable for anything published on your platform, criminal or otherwise, until you're told about it. And you might think that's a terrible idea, but if you think about it, well, how else would Facebook run? If Facebook had to vet everything before it went live, nothing would ever appear on Facebook. So Section 230 has been the defense that people have used, and has been a successful defense, because without it, we wouldn't have social media, really. In Telegram's case, clearly the authorities believe that no longer applies strongly enough. There's obviously been the arrest in France. My hunch is that somewhere along the line, the authorities believe that they've got something on Pavel Durov that goes beyond just, I run a platform I didn't know, sorry. And they've got something that indicates that he was absolutely aware and signed off some content that he shouldn't have done. That's my hunch as to why they've managed to get that prosecution to stick. But I don't know. If I had to bet, I bet that's probably what will come out in the trial, but we'll see.
It will be fascinating if there is a trial, it'd be absolutely fascinating to see what does come out and hopefully give us more insight into the way that criminals are using some of these platforms. I wanted to talk about crypto. And you mentioned this, you mentioned in particular in your remarks North Korea's use of crypto, but also mixers and tumblers like Tornado Cash. And I spoke to somebody in the National Crime Agency in the UK who said they didn't see a legitimate reason for mixers and tumblers, and actually they couldn't see a legitimate reason for crypto at all. Interested to get your perspective on that. Are there valid, legitimate reasons for these kind of services, these virtual assets?
Yeah, I'm not one of these people who thinks that sides with that, because I've seen people using crypto for people who want to remit money overseas, who don't particularly want to pay the fees. Also, you've got to sort of understand philosophically where the crypto world is coming from. It's not the decision of people in the National Crime Agency to decide whether crypto should or shouldn't exist, is the argument that the crypto people say. We invented this, and it's proved very successful and very resilient. I'm sorry that you don't like it, but it's not yours to control. So that's the sort of philosophical argument that would come across. In terms of things like mixers, there is a really fascinating argument. And again, as a journalist, it's my job to, wherever I can, see both sides, to certainly try and see both sides and try and listen to both sides. Don't get me wrong, there are some things where you think, well, that's just wrong. But the crypto mixers, I do find that debate really interesting. On the one hand, as I say, crypto mixers seem to be a perfect engine for money laundering and have been used for that, notably by North Korea, allegedly to the tune of $500 million. However, one of the users of Tornado Cash was also Vitalik Buterin, who set up the Ethereum Foundation, which is behind Ether, one of the big cryptocurrencies. He used it to donate money to Ukraine, because he wants to donate in crypto, but doesn't massively want the Russian government to be able to track that transaction. Now, obviously, by outing himself and saying, I donated money to Ukraine, he's obviously, shot the fox there, so he's exposed himself. But he said, look, I did it through Tornado Cash because I wanted anonymity. And this is the thing, the play that's going on, the battle that's being fought at the moment in that case I talked about of Roman Storm, one of the co-founders of Tornado Cash, is money laundering versus privacy. Where do you stand on that? And it's almost like this amazing case has come along. If somebody had to put that to the test, you could not think of a more strident example than, okay, would you support North Korea laundering $500 million for privacy? Would you do that? It sounds like one of those hypothetical questions you talk about in the pub. No, this has actually happened. And so now that case is being put through. I just find that really fascinating.
Oh, but I think that's a really interesting dynamic. We do work on financial inclusion here, and obviously there are benefits to crypto and other types of technology from that perspective. But I also think, I do a lot of work on fraud. And if you think about the interventions that we might want to make, or actually what would be the best interventions to prevent, detect fraudulent activity, often they're not the kind of interventions you would want to make, or there might be significant negative consequences to making those interventions. So getting that balance right, I think, is really tricky. And do you think new technology is going to complicate that even further?
Yes. Yes, I do, inevitably, brilliantly, because obviously as a journalist covering technology, complication means sort of headlines. It is going to be interesting to see where this goes. And the crypto community is kind of balancing different aspects of its membership. And this goes right back to sort of earliest days of Bitcoin. If you look right back at the earliest days of the people who were in Bitcoin, who were plugging it, you had two sort of groups of people, really. On the one hand, you have people who went, this is an amazing financial innovation and it's going to make scads of money, I'm in. And then on the other hand, you have people who frankly didn't care about the money, including, by the way, the very early adopters of it, who could have cashed out to the tune of billions, it seems didn't, who believed it was philosophically important. And that appealed to both the hard left and the hard right. It's really interesting sort of political alignments there. Now, when we're talking about where crypto moves, you've still got this kind of commercial, mercantile aspect to it. But within it, baked into the DNA of crypto, you've still got this very philosophical outlook of, this is for the good of the world. There are advantages here. Do we want to give the world's finances over to the people who, frankly, haven't done a great job at managing them? So, you've got to look at that sort of philosophical aspect as well. Whenever you think about crypto, you've got to bear in mind there is a philosophical, moral outlook to this that sits within it, that's baked into its DNA.
Brilliant. I want to open the floor to questions. There should be a roving mic. If I could ask you to say your name and organisation where you, and in the interest of time and to get through as many questions as possible, to keep them as questions rather than comments, that would be great. Eva, thank you.
Thank you very much. A question. Ewan Grant, United Kingdom Defence Forum. I've worked extensively in the EU programs in Ukraine and other ex-Soviet states, never Russia. Question, who is listening to you and their responses encourage you, and who is, frankly, not paying enough attention? Thank you.
Interesting question.
Who's listening to me and who's not paying enough attention? Honestly, you and I have no idea who listens. You put out a book, as I hope people read it and enjoy it. If I had to sort of, it's difficult because the people I talk to, within DOJ and with the National Crime Agency and within government, the people I meet and talk to are the people who sort of get it because they're meeting me and talking to me. So I don't know what I don't know. There are scads of people, I imagine, who could really do with sort of a primer in money laundering and cryptocurrency and tech, who aren't getting it. I do think that if we're going to resolve these tensions around how do we get privacy in finance and privacy in cryptocurrency, but also tackle money laundering, the folks on the policy side need to start getting a bit more technical and understanding a bit more how these things work. Because if you're going to get if you're as a policy person going to go in and talk to crypto, enthusiasts and techies, being able to talk a bit of their language will really help them listen to you. If you just go in and say, I don't understand how any of this works, and I've never written code in my life, but I just think it's bad, that's just not going to get you very far. So I feel like this movement needs to be done on that side, from the voice of authority, kind of going, okay, explain this tech, and I'm actually interested in it, getting your hands a bit dirty. On the tech side, though, I think there needs to be movement in terms of, if you are dogmatically saying privacy trumps all, yep, $500 million for North Korean nuclear weapons, yep, fine, as long as I get privacy, that's fine. You are going to be lumped in with some awful people at that stage. So you've got to, again, move towards the other side. That's broad, I'm not sure whether that answers your question, but that's broadly speaking who I think needs to listen to the various sides. Okay, all right, thanks.
There's two questions over here. I think the lady in the red dress is first.
Either the RUSI expensive refit didn't stretch to 2 roving microphones, you see, so you have to...
Hi, my name's Juliet. Until a month ago, I was working at HSBC, which, side point, if you want a contact to help do your experiment, I'm sure they'd be happy to help. It's not like they haven't had that.
Hi, HSBC, I've got a call about money laundering.
Yeah. So I'm sorry if this is a very ignorant question, but I thought that to purchase crypto, you need to do it from a bank account. So I don't understand how that Ken Dog example, simply giving someone $1 million in cash when he then bought this crypto, was he needing to do it through a bank step? In which case, I don't really see how that spares you that first challenge hurdle. If not, then it seems fairly extraordinary to me that there aren't the kind of KYC same requirements that a crypto exchange say. Thank you for your 1 million cash. Where did you get that from? Sorry if that's ignorant.
No, it's a really good question. And for most people, if you went out, I suspect most of us went out today and wanted to invest in crypto and buy crypto, we would be going to somewhere like Binance, or Kraken, and so great, it's very simple. Sign up for an account, connect your bank account, transfer money from your HSBC bank account into Binance. Way, you've got crypto. That's how most of us do it. And you're right, if that was how the money launderers were behaving, increasingly companies, again, Binance, interesting example, hasn't always been the way, but increasingly these crypto companies that are dealing with consumers are putting in place know your customer controls, anti-money laundering controls. However, you've got to think like a criminal. How are we going to find our way around that? Well, one of the things, again, the North Koreans did, just to pick another North Korean example, is they faked the customer IDs. So there's a very amazing example of American investigators looking into laundering of crypto, and they discovered from a victim a bunch of crypto being washed through a bunch of accounts at one of the crypto companies. So they went to this crypto company and said, hey, here's the accounts. We know money was laundered through them. Can you give us the user details for the accounts? And the crypto firm said, yeah, we keep passport details. They take a selfie of themselves with their ID. We'll just send it to you. Great. So the Americans get these 2 photos for the 2 account holders, brilliant, with their names and their passports and their address on it. Fantastic. The problem was they've been photoshopped. They were the same photograph with 2 heads photoshopped and different IDs photoshopped in. So for a start, can I get around the KYC? How robust is the cryptocurrency company's KYC? It's not traditionally been as robust as traditional finance has. Second thing is, there is a way to get crypto without a bank account, and you can mine crypto. Because obviously the way most cryptocurrency works, notably Bitcoin, is new crypto, new Bitcoin gets generated, gets mined by people as part of the process of running the Bitcoin system. So again, you can take, Bitcoin ab initio. It has no record, no connection to any bank account. If you're a miner and you've got a bunch of crypto, well then you can absolutely swap that for £1 million of somebody's cash, and nobody's had to connect a bank account at any stage. Even if you don't do that, and you think, okay, I'm going to have to connect my bank account to go into crypto at some stage. So you connect your bank account, you transfer into crypto, you then move into a different type of crypto. So you swap from Bitcoin into maybe something like Monero, which is a privacy-preserving currency. You then might put it into an NFT, take it out of the NFT, swap it into another crypto, put it into a mixer. So you're right, at a certain stage, I've connected my bank account to my crypto, but in the process over to here, where I'm dealing with the drug gang, the connection to my bank account has been completely lost. So that's how you'd sort of deal with that. Again, don't do this, it's illegal, but that's roughly speaking how they would do.
And there was another question next.
Yeah, thanks very much. obviously, as you're suggesting there's some challenges with the KYC. But I suppose further to that, if you're dealing, if law enforcement's dealing with a, an individual in the West, it's crypto's moved through an exchange, like Coinbase, for instance. Not too much trouble there to contact Coinbase, get the information. In your experience, when you've been looking at some of these cases or speaking to law enforcement, to what degree is it a challenge when exchange is in a bit more of a challenging jurisdiction, and I can imagine law enforcement having to request mutual legal assistance. You hear 6 months for that kind of process. Crypto, obviously, you can bounce it through multiple exchanges, multiple mixes, tumblers. You could, to my mind, move that crypto quite quickly through multiple different jurisdictions, multiple different exchanges, and law enforcement really going to struggle as soon as it hits that exchange in a jurisdiction which isn't so responsive. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. From conversations I've had with law enforcement, there's just this sliding scale. There's a spectrum of cryptocurrency businesses, from the sort of legitimate who do know your currency and know your customer checks and who respond very quickly to law enforcement inquiries, and inquiries from the kind of tracing firms, Chainalysis and Elliptic and TRM Labs, want to do the right thing. And what's interesting about those firms is, I think the logic behind that is a hard business logic, which is to say, look, at some stage we're going to want to apply for banking licenses and finance licenses. If we can show we do know your customer checks and we work with law enforcement, we do the right thing, the authorities are going to look kindly on us when we apply for these licenses or when we try and open up an office here and there and so on. And then you've got at the other end of the spectrum, dark exchanges, you might call them, or dodgy exchanges that have absolutely know your customer in place, are based in jurisdictions deliberately meant to fox the authorities. Garantex in Russia, notably one of them. And you might think, well, why don't the criminals just sort of go there? That would be surely where all of the dodgy transactions are. The problem is liquidity. You need to be putting through a lot of money. You need to be sloshing your money about. Can you turn up to Garantex with, again, $500 million of stolen crypto? It probably doesn't have the liquidity to put it through. So what you've got in the middle is a sort of grey area of exchanges that might have a bit of know your customer checks but aren't that great, might respond to law enforcement eventually but takes a little while. And as a criminal, what you're doing is looking to kind of play all of these different factors together. So if I steal something, I might put it into a dodgy exchange first, but then take it into one of the exchanges that I know, even if the police trace it to, it's going to take a while. And then I'll try and extricate it through one of the legitimate exchanges. One of the interesting things about this, and we haven't mentioned this actually, I should do, is with cryptocurrency, one of your big problems as a launderer is currency fluctuation. Because obviously, as you're aware, cryptocurrency goes up and down. So, you put your $1 million of drug money into Bitcoin, and then Elon Musk tweets overnight, or X's or whatever we call it overnight, and suddenly your drug money is only worth half what it was yesterday. That's not good. So one of the other challenges now is to try and change your cryptocurrency either quickly enough into fiat that it holds its value, or, and this is the newer game, to transfer it into what are called stable coins, which I'm sure you come across, which are linked to the value of the dollar, so Tether being the big one. If you move your crypto, stolen crypto, or dodgy crypto into Tether, great, now I can breathe a sigh of relief. It's going to be worth tomorrow in dollars what it was worth yesterday in dollars. So again, you're factoring all these different things as you're moving the money around. Which exchange am I going to? Can the police track it and freeze it? Is it going to hold its value? Is the cryptocurrency exchange going to get sanctioned and go under, which happened with, I think, Suex, another one of the Russian exchanges. So as a money launderer in crypto, you're balancing all of these different things, together. I hope that's been
very completed. The man in the middle, Yeva. Thank you.
I just want to ask, you mentioned that crypto was a smaller proportion than normal financial fraud. So I wanted to know roughly what the size of crypto is at the moment and how fast it's growing. If I can ask a second question, which is what do you reckon at the moment are the 3 top crypto hubs in the world or countries?
Yeah, good question. So firstly, to my shame, I don't know how big crypto is compared to traditional finance. I would have thought I've come across that figure and remembered it. It's eminently Googleable, but I mean, you're talking, it's a tiny fraction, even though crypto gets a lot of headlines, it's a tiny, tiny fraction. What's interesting is, and I think financial institutions and governments have started to think about this, is, you know, you've got the massive boat of traditional finance and the tiny sort of barge next to it of crypto, but at a certain stage, it doesn't take much for the barge to start to tip the big boat. And so I think that's, you know, particularly with things like Tether, once you get currencies that are linked to the dollar, as more and more people get involved in cryptocurrency, you start to see which way the wind is blowing. There's an interesting question as well about how much cryptocurrency is illicit. You know, cryptocurrency is this block, how much of that block is dodgy stuff. Again, if you read some of the tracing companies, I mean, Chainalysis is one of the big tracing companies, they will tell you it's fractions of a percent, maybe 1%. It's tiny, tiny sort of numbers, you know, really small percentages. The difficulty with that is, how do you know what crypto is dodgy and what isn't? So going back to the example of the Din sisters, they would take drug cash, give it to this guy, Chemdog, he would change it into crypto and give them the crypto. Now, at that point, you can look at that crypto wallet and there is no criminal history to that crypto wallet at all. So as far as the tracing companies are concerned, it's clean money. You know, to come back to the lady's point there, you know, if you could do something like that, you've got clean crypto that's come from a dodgy source. You know, that's how you start to sort of wash your crypto. So it's possible that the percentage of crypto that's illicit is much higher than that sort of 1% or sub 1%. I did read one study that put it at sort of 20, 30% of crypto, and it seemed very, very high to me, and I wasn't sure. The methodology didn't make a lot of sense to me, but, you know, certainly it will be higher than that. And in terms of where the sort of popular crypto hubs are, you won't be surprised to learn that the US and the UK are big players in this. Again, companies put out sort of rankings of it, and those rankings fluctuate. But places like Vietnam, cryptocurrency extremely popular, the Philippines, and of course Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine was, I think, the #3 fastest adopter of cryptocurrency in 2022, for obvious reasons. So yeah, it's been interesting.
We have time for one more question. The woman there. Yeah, thank you.
Hiya. I just wondered, from all the different cases that you've looked at, to what extent do you think that the use of crypto for money laundering is a sort of thing of the moment, exploitation of a unregulated space, one where law enforcement and the regulators are very much behind, as you've said, law enforcement don't really are perhaps not quite as skilled in the technology to understand what they're doing, and whether it's an exploitation or whether actually there are really, whether it's a kind of evolution, because actually crypto and the privacy provides many more advantages over and above laundering using fiat currency. So assuming that the regulation in the crypto space will increase. We've seen MiCA in the EU, and as the regulation increases in that space, and as the companies that are not exploiting, but looking at the auditability of the blockchain and things like that, as that increases, which to some extent may make it easier to investigate and audit across crypto, whether this is a kind of thing of the moment and we'll see a rebalancing where that, or are there other advantages?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, will sort of crypto is crypto in its adolescence and it'll kind of straighten up and fly right, you know, as it ages? Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think, you know, that's behind a lot of the sort of government activity that's going on, is this idea of, I think, I read an interesting book called Treasury's War a little while ago, which is about what happened after 9/11 and how the Treasury got involved in the battle against terrorism. And basically what they pursued was a good bank, bad bank strategy. It's like, if you support or condone or turn a blind eye to terrorism, fine, we can't shut you down. You'll never do business in the US ever again. We will freeze you out. And good luck out there in the wilderness. I think that around crypto, there's a bit of a similar tactic going on. The US government's like, look, there's good crypto and bad crypto. We can't shut the bad crypto down, but you will never do business in the US. You want to be in the good pile? Okay, KYC is what you introduce. You know, how frequently do you respond to law enforcement requests? You know, welcome to the sunshine, but if you don't want to be in that. What's interesting about crypto is that, you know, as I say, built into its DNA as part of the philosophy of it is a bunch of people who say, well, hang on, look, this was never about competing with or being traditional finance. We created this new stuff ourselves out of code with nobody's say-so, and it's worked and it's powerful and it's resilient. And now you, the forces of traditional finance, come along and say, well, hey, you've got to obey all these rules and you've got to do like we do. No, jog on. We control this. You don't control this. And that may sound like a bit of a straw man argument, but I can hear that voice. I can hear that spirit in a lot of the conversation around crypto, them saying, no, the whole point of this is we don't have those regulations. And if you look at Tornado Cash, it's a perfect example. Tornado Cash was invented by 3 dudes who just wrote the code with a bit of investment, and boom, it's out there and it gets used. Tornado Cash has been sanctioned by the US government for laundering $500 million partly from the North Koreans. These guys are being prosecuted. Guess what? Tornado Cash is still up and running. It's code on the internet, and it is washing hundreds of millions of dollars and preserving the privacy of hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't shut it down. You can't kill it. It's just code on the internet. So as much as the sort of forces of tradition and authority might come along and say, come on, guys, straighten up and fly right, introduce some rules here and get your house in order, there's philosophically a part of the crypto community that turns around and says, no, that's not what this is about. And also at any one time, any dude in their bedroom can write a few lines of code, release it on the internet, and suddenly there's a whole new type of cryptocurrency, which is the brilliance of it, but also the concern of it. So it's a long way of saying I don't know what the future is. But if you're thinking, oh, well, crypto will just become, like traditional finance, there were some interesting arguments to say that no, it won't. That the sort of revolutionary nature of it and the kind of controversial nature of it may stay around for a lot longer than you think. It's not like a kind of novel financial innovation that kind of is a bit wonky at first, but then becomes mainstream. I think there's other dynamics behind it than that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but
I'll be around
may be willing to take your questions. And I think you now have a pen, so you can sign books. I can see a couple of copies here. Just before Tom says a few words, please join me in thanking Geoff for his time this afternoon. I hope everybody found it as fascinating as I did.